So talking a little bit about the evolution of, I guess, really Preseem, the monitoring side of it. We started out from the very get-go with, again, there's two key concepts: the latency, the round-trip time latency, the retransmits to see if there's buffering happening, if there's packet loss, if there's bottlenecks in your network, causing a poor user experience. And what we found is, based on lots of feedback too, obviously, from our customers, is that they're really good at finding exactly where the problems are, when they're happening. And now our next step, or it's kind of a bunch of parallel things we're building, but in this arena, the next thing we really are focusing on is why. Help you figure out as quickly as possible and as easily as possible when Preseem says something isn't quite right, why that is. And so the few things we're working on now, and we've been rolling out to customers over the last couple of months, is we're starting to pull in data directly from the access point. So key metrics like frame utilization for Cambium, airtime for Ubiquiti, that kind of thing. Try and have everything in one pane of glass to quickly compare all the metrics together and figure out really what's going on. So that's one big part of it. The next one, we love data. You probably figured that out by now. Tons of cloud capacity processing. Dan's going to talk about that next as well, but just doing more and more. And really the goal is not to just show you metrics, but to show you information that's actionable, right? So that's a big deal for us. We're going to keep investing in that. And I think with the stuff that we've done over the last few months, it's really become a lot easier to distinguish. Like, we can tell you if there's a problem with an access point, for example, right? But to distinguish, is it overloaded or underperforming? Because you're going to take different actions based on that. Okay, so here's some of the key metrics that we've pulled in. Again, this is the access point level stuff. There's a few more than this, but these are some of the main ones. So for the Cambium, the frame utilization, pretty cool metric. It's pretty reliable. When you get to 100%, it usually indicates that it's working pretty hard, or we can see a definite correlation between that and our latency. Multiplexing gain for the Medusas. I'll show you a slide on that. It's kind of neat how that plays into this. RF packet drop, retransmissions. The retransmissions there tend to be an indicator of interference. On the Ubiquiti side, it's a little lighter, unfortunately, in what it makes available. Airtime for the new AC gear. Unfortunately, it's not quite as black and white, maybe, as the frame utilization. Like, I've rarely seen it go over 60 or 80 for sure. I've never seen it go to 100, so it's a little more, a little less reliable by itself. But certainly looking at the patterns, you can find some neat stuff there as well. Okay, so I won't go through every single line item here, but so again, really the question is this access point delivering good experience or not? And if it isn't, is it because it's underperforming or overloaded? So we find that still the most useful thing to make that initial decision is the latency. If the actual customer's traffic latency for all the subscribers on this access point is elevated, there's something choking that thing, right? There's something that needs to be investigated. And the next thing we've pulled in, and again, Dan's going to talk about that one as well, is we now have a typical bandwidth that we expect for a certain access point based on a whole wide number that we're monitoring now. And so what we find is if you're close to that and you have a high latency, you've probably got an overloaded access point. If you're well under, you've probably got an underperforming access point that needs some channel change or some other fixes or that kind of thing. So pretty good. And then you can kind of put those side by side with things like the frame utilization for the Cambiums and see, does the access point agree? Does it think it's busy as well, for example? Then you can use the elevated RF packet transmissions and see if, it's a good sign for Cambium to know if it's struggling to deliver the data. It's not getting axed back from the clients and that kind of thing. Okay, any questions on that? Anything we should be adding? Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Are you doing any MikroTik?
We do. We haven't pulled these stats in for the MikroTik yet. As Dan will talk about as well, 80% of gear is Ubiquiti or Cambium that we see. It's that dominant. But over time, if it's available through SNMP and it's useful, you'll see us rolling out more and more of that for sure. Yeah, that's definitely the plan. Any other questions on that? Okay. All right, so very similar for the Ubiquiti. Key difference being is you can look at airtime instead of, for the AC gear instead of frame utilization. And then the AMC and AMQ for the that's all pulled in Preseem now as well. Okay, so let's go into some actual examples here. This is a first generation Ubiquiti rocket, 5AC appointed multi-point. So if you look, I'm going to wander over here. So if you look at the latency chart on the top left, that's the average latency of all the subscribers on that sector, airtime in the middle and downstream bit rate below. So you can see on the left, for example, the latency kind of spikes, right? The very, very left edge there, along with the bandwidth. that's definitely an overloaded access point. And if you look at that dotted line at the bottom in the bit rate, that's the kind of typical value we expect. And you can see it gets pretty close. So this could be tuned a little bit, but it's basically overloaded, right? But then look what happens about a third of the way in, where the latency flatlines at 200. You can see the label already, you can read what that is, but that's basically, it got interference, the access point couldn't get the data out, latency just spiked way up. Airtime, interestingly, I was a little disappointed to not see the airtime go up. I don't know why that is. You look at that metric and everything looks fine. Actually, it even went down a little bit. Yeah?
We've been trying to figure that out ourselves, so we've been graphing airtime for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Competition, and it means nothing.
Right. So interesting.
It seems to be a poll of how many subscriber units are on the unit,
Yeah.
rather than how busy the unit is.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm finding too. So I can definitely see a correlation. Well, when there's not interference like this, the latency goes up in Preseem, the airtime kind of goes with it. The absolute level varies a little bit, and yeah, here they're completely out of whack. So you kind of like got to look at the whole picture to see if there is an issue, I think. And you can see the downstream bit right now is way under the orange line, right? So it's obvious, underperforming. So I actually talked to a customer about this one, just make sure I wasn't telling you guys lies here as I brought this up. But it was definitely interference. It changed the channel, got a lot better. They ended up upgrading it to a Gen 2 AC Prism because it's much better at dealing with the noise than the first generation stuff. So that's the first example here. Okay, so the next one is a Cambium EP1000. There's actually two kind of issues hidden in here. So on the very left, but the left quarter or so, you can see the top left latency is elevated between 75 milliseconds. Downstream bit rate are about at the orange line. Frame utilization at the top right at 100%. Right? Very obvious. It's telling you the same thing. It's maxed out. And the RF packet drop was good too. The access point is emitting, it's dropping packets. So really cool to see everything line up and point at the same thing. So you look at this and you're like, yep, that's the issue, right? But then look at what happens where I drew the yellow line. The latency goes way up for about an hour and comes back down. Frame utilization bottoms out. No packet drops, way less bit rate, downstream bit rate. This ended up being a backhaul problem that snuck in and elevated the latency for everybody. But it wasn't the access point that was at fault, right? Because it's no longer busy at all. It's getting choked before that. So again, the combination of this data, when you see this higher latency and the frame utilization came down at the same time, you know something else is going on right away. So again, trying to figure out the why behind all this. And I don't know if Darren's still here. No, I think he left. This is one of his access points, but cool. Okay, any questions on that one? Okay, so last but not least, the 450M, the Cambium Medusa. This one has 89 stations on it. So kind of neat as well. So the frame utilization at the bottom right, you can see it's at 100% during the peak. That's normally a bad sign for the Cambium. But if you look at the latency at the top left, it's actually okay, 50-ish milliseconds. That's pretty typical for that gear. And the downstream bit rate, this particular operator tunes the snot out of his access points. He's at 250 megs. He's well above what we normally see for this. So QE data saying everything is good, but frame utilization is definitely high, right? So what's going on? This is the multi-user MIMO feature kicking in. And so the way Cambium works is when you get to the first time to 100% frame utilization, you're in single user MIMO mode. And then once that's done, it starts doing the parallel or the simultaneous transmissions. So you can see that in a multiplexing gain on the top right. It's as high as 2 in this case, so it's doing 2 simultaneous transmissions on average. In theory, that could go high as 7. In practice, you probably won't see that. And again, it's kind of hard to tell, but just by looking at the frame utilization and the multiplexing gain, how high can you still push this thing, right? And really, the next thing you're going to see happening is the latency is going to start creeping up. And when you see that, you know you've kind of maxed things out. So yeah, that's a hardworking Medusa here. Any questions on that before I go to the little bit of roadmap here? So talk about the future a little bit. As I mentioned, we started with the QE metrics directly from Preseem, the latency, the retransmits, the bandwidth, all that stuff. Then we're adding in the AP metrics now. Next big step for us is to pull in the subscriber module metrics as well. So signal strength type stuff, and pull all that into one place. Then do a whole lot of data processing, a little bit of magic. And the next things you want to do is, today we have a score that's heavily based on the latency, that green, yellow, red. Make that more composite. It takes multiple factors into consideration to again save you time having to dig through it yourself. Subscriber score. So we've got this wireless table that shows you all the access points. We want to get to the point where we can tell you what subscribers are having issues as well proactively. Yeah, I guess last but not least, take those subscriber module metrics, add them to the subscriber dashboard, and that way in one place you can see exactly, yep, their latency is high, access point is not, signal's good, signal's bad, must be Wi-Fi at home or not. That's the next step there as well.